You are listening to SPN, the Sports Podcasting Network.
وتكلم من هناك لشوارزنيجر
Va a pegarle Ronaldinho Gaucho. Ya lo hace. Pierna derecha, directo al arco. ¡Golazo! 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 ¡Golazo!
This is Soccer Today, live on SPN Radio, your new live show about the beautiful game in all its glory, with Duane, Rollins and Kevin Laramee. MLS, EPL, La Liga, Champions League, all is fair game. Powered by the Sports Podcasting Network. Visit us at sportspodcastingnetwork.com.
And welcome to Hump Day, otherwise known as D2 Wednesdays. From this point forward until the end of time, I'm coining it now. Kevin Laramee joins me in Montreal. How you doing, Kevin?
I'm doing pretty good, Duane, until the end of time. Well, if you're in Quebec or in the Northeast right now, the end of time seems like it started yesterday at noon and it's still going on. But be safe out there. If you're traveling, shoveling, walking, driving, well, just take the metro. It's a lot easier.
Yeah, I went for a jog last night, and it was snowing all day, but then for some reason the weather shifted again during the hour that I was in the gym, and when I was walking back home to watch the Whitecaps game, it was a bit of apocalyptic kind of scene out there. So we'll see.
Well, you probably saw, Duane, by now the video, the pileup that happened on the 13 and on the 10, and there's people that I know that are still stuck on the highway since last night. There's people that were luckily safe, but there was like a 50-car pileup on the 10, and it's always one random dude at the end of a pileup video that comes in really, really fast and destroys like 5 cars and injures people. But yeah, dangerous scenes in Montreal and the region yesterday.
Yeah, not to belabor the weather talk, but back when I lived in New Brunswick, I had to drive through Quebec quite a bit, and those roads can be pretty treacherous at points. So yes, of course, drive carefully, folks.
Speaking of treacherous and careful.
Yes, exactly. The Whitecaps last night down in Quebec, down in Mexico, playing Tigres, who arguably is, as many people have said, although their form right now is not great, but talent-wise, on paper-wise, perhaps the most talented team in the region. The Whitecaps went in. They had a plan. They executed that plan more or less for 70 minutes.
Yeah, pretty much. Like way more than we expected. And I have to say, was that plan trying to jump and dive in front of every possible attempt on goal and trying to stop the ball from reaching outside? It was quite impressive to see the Whitecaps player, with no regard to their personal safety, jump in front of attempts like never have seen the Whitecaps do before.
Yeah, I'm sure that somewhere in Toronto, a lot of the TFC guys were watching that game and just licking their lips, because it's going to be a challenge for those guys to sort of pick their bodies up, recover their bodies in 4 days, and get back to play what will be probably an intense game as well on the turf at BC Place. But nonetheless, to focus this on last night, look, one of the things that I said when I remember watching the Impact, I remember watching TFC down there, obviously. And of course, I remember watching the Impact down there. And there was a distinct difference in how the Impact played versus how TFC played and versus how the Whitecaps played last night. I tweeted this out. And to explain it a little bit further, the Impact did sit back. Of course, they have to defend. You have to. But what they did differently and what they did effectively in their trips down to Mexico was that they also were willing to put some numbers forward on those opportunities on that 25% of the time when they did get the ball.
Well, Duane, there was a big difference too. Once they had an opportunity, it wasn't Breck Shea in the box with the ball trying to finish. It was Piatti. So it was a lot more clinical in that aspect too.
Of course, yeah.
First of all, that dive for Breck Shea, we'll get back to it. When he kept on slipping all night long, the grass wasn't the best at the Volcano last night. That's the name of Tigres Stadium in Monterrey, by the way. Monterrey is 2-hour drive south of the American border, so it's not a town far, far away. There is some fans of Tigres from Houston and the Texas area that like to go down for games of Tigres at home. But Vancouver, Duane, what was interesting to me is they got a few opportunities, but the players who had those opportunities didn't finish it. There was two clear opportunities. The Breckshay there when he dove trying to get a penalty, but before that he was in position with the ball in the box. And Mosquito later on, where he had to bury that. He get past the keeper, past everybody, got an open net. The angle is not easy. But at that level, if you want to have a result in Mexico, you kind of have to bury that.
Yeah, the Mosquito miss was the Shea miss was pretty bad, and again, we'll direct that or we'll make fun of that one. Let's just be honest with ourselves. We're going to make fun of that a little bit more in a minute, but the Mosquito miss was pretty just poorly executed. So you're right, there were some chances there. Again, when it comes down to the counter, though, and you're right, maybe the Whitecaps don't have the players. Maybe you put a guy like Davies out there, like the young kid who was almost playing defensively all night. And you're not giving him a chance to get out and run. I think that you're defeating the purpose because you really do need to spread them a little bit, the Mexican teams. If you just pack in and defend, especially down there, it's going to collapse at some point. And it did last night at the end, especially that 85th minute goal, the second goal, which was really, I think, just a reflection on how tired they were at that point, Kevin.
Yeah, tired, and the velocity of that ball when it went to the net, like it would have gotten to like probably 20 goals. If you put like goals next to each other, it would have gone through like Karate Kid style through all the plate of ice. Like that's the velocity that ball had.
Yeah, certainly in a world-class finish by a world-class player, right? And that's the difference between these two teams, and it bears repeating. And they sort of hinted at it on the broadcast here in TSN last night, the last minute. We talked about this yesterday, but at the very last second, TSN got the rights for this game. They will show the reverse leg, by the way. No indication of what would happen I think if the Whitecaps got to the final, they would make sure that they showed it. Probably might even put a live broadcast crew out there, but I doubt that the an all-Mexican final would be shown, or even a Dallas Mexican final. Look, I was reading some stuff, and one of the things that drives me nuts on these nights like this is you talk about hot takes, and you'll get a lot of hot takes from people that don't like MLS, that think that we people that do support MLS are just sitting back and blindly accepting the fact that the Mexican League is always going to be better, and that, we pat these guys on the head and say, good job, good effort, good job. That's not the case at all. I think a lot of us are critical of how the American teams and Canadian teams sometimes take this competition. I think a lot of us are critical of the fact that MLS doesn't do the things needed to change to make this league more competitive at that level. But the reality is, until those things happen, you have to be realistic about the fact that there's an $8 million salary budget on the one team and a $2 million salary budget on the other team.
Pretty much like 40 to like. I remember I had a lot of flashback last night, of course, watching Vancouver playing Tigres. I was transported back to a very similar situation, just in a little bit bigger stadium at Estadio Azteca in the first leg. So it was similar in that way where, yes, Tigres we're going to open and trying to give a show to their fans, but they're not going to open like they're going to open at BC Place in the last 20 minutes of the second half. That's when the game actually going to start and finish and be decided, if not earlier. That's where I'm still worried about, because I've seen it happen with my own eyes. I felt it. It's going to happen in the second leg. But for now, 2 goals down in the first leg in Mexico, Tigres had a lot of opportunity. Like Gignac could have scored a hattie last night. He could have scored 3. He scored none. A lot of things could happen if an inch here and there. Like the amount of time Usted just let the ball go out. He was on the post and just let it come out of the playing field because he knew he was there. But it's just a question of inches. Like a few inches there, it's a shot on net. The amount of save Usted made, like it's a 2-0 game, and Usted played a very good game. Maybe late at the game he was tired and we seen a few mistakes here and there, but for a 70-minute plus, Usted played better than he did the weeks before. You had players playing better than usually, but it's still against a Tigres team that has, like you mentioned, a salary cap of over 30-40 million salary cap. A salary pool, basically.
Budget, yeah.
Yeah, budget over 30-40 million, depending on the years and the sponsors. And it's 2 totally different type of roster building philosophy.
Yeah, well, yeah, it's exactly. And look, this isn't going to change anytime soon in terms of how these teams are developed in terms of their salary budget. You're going to have, I mean, if you include the DP's salaries into MLS's salary, it gets a little closer when you look at things, but that's another aspect in the roster building that makes it very difficult. And the one thing that I always point out to people when they talk about the differences in this competition is what makes it very difficult for the Major League Soccer teams, particularly under the old format, which is probably why MLS teams supported the idea of going to a straight knockout, is because they have a better chance in the knockout. Over 2 games, things can happen. Over a group stage, it is very difficult to get past the Mexican team because they just have so much more depth across the board, right? They just have to. I mean, you have that much more money to spend. Of course, your 20th player is going to be better, and that's exactly what happens here. Vancouver fans, of course, want to spin this in a most positive way if they're fans, and they want to believe that the Whitecaps are still in this tie, and I don't blame them for that, to be clear. But as you just said, as Kevin and I sat beside each other and watched the second game of that Club America final a couple years ago in Montreal, the difference between the Mexican teams and the American teams, and sorry, I shouldn't say American teams, the MLS teams, in this competition is that they don't play that away leg in the same way. There's no way in hell a Mexican team's ever going to go sit back like they did, like Vancouver did there. They will come into BC Place with all in total belief that they can score goals there. And I don't think that the turf is going to be this great equalizer that some people I saw on Twitter last week think it would be. So
the only great equalizer would be the temperature we have in Montreal and Toronto right now. So open up BC Place and hope for snow. Then you'll have that great equalizer.
Yeah. Unfortunately, the 2 goals down. Now, look, is there a moral victory out of this by holding them scoreless as long as they did? I know certainly I think back to the days of TFC down there, to go back to that example. And I remember a game against Cruz Azul where they drew, I believe it was Pachuca, pardon me.
Pachuca,
not Panchuca. I spelled it Panchuca in the outline too. Anyway, Pachuca.
It's still good.
You knew what I was talking about.
Yeah, exactly.
English is my first language. Pachuca, which this is a Spanish word, so that didn't make any sense. Anyway, they got a draw 0-0 down there, and I remember at the end of that, everyone at the pub we were watching it, like being very happy that they got the draw and like just laughing because they knew that wasn't replicable. You can't do that game after game. But the Whitecaps, for their first sort of big game against the Mexican team, can probably be somewhat happy that they got the clean sheet in the one half. They had some good performances by Onstead and some of the defenders. I think Parker played a good game, although he was a little handsy at times. There was some stuff there to take. But in terms of the Whitecaps being able to turn this tie around in the second leg, I'd be pretty surprised. And I'll just say that.
It'll take a lot for Vancouver to overcome the 2-goal deficit, but they're at home. There's always possibilities. The fact that Vancouver did make some changes from last week's roster, 8 changes for that matter. You had the likes of Alphonso Davies started this game. I was impressed by a few points yesterday, Duane, I have to say. Breck Shea, his work rate up higher than usually on the left side of the field. He was able to control the ball at one point and able to the counterattack, to transition from a counterattack to moving a little block higher, and we've seen opportunities coming from it. So there is some positive aspect that Carl Robinson can take from this game and bring to Major League Soccer. And if you put back a very strong lineup for your second leg, depending on your schedule, and now they got Toronto coming up, it will be interesting to see how they manage, because it's now or never. You never know when you're going to be back in a semifinal of a CONCACAF Champions League. And you have to take your chances and you have to try. 2 goals is enough that hope is not gone. Hope is there. There is possibilities. Just a lot of work ahead of everybody.
All right. That's I want to talk about the Shea dive, but let's take a quick break. We'll come back. We'll talk about the dive just for a couple seconds, and then we'll get into Tweetgate.
You are listening to Soccer Today, live on SPN Radio. Visit sportspodcastingnetwork.com for more.
And we're back. Kevin, was that a dive, or does Breck Shea can he just not walk?
Well, I think it was a combination of 3 things. All right. The first caveat is yes, from far away, the grass did seem in a decent shape. But once you saw close-up shot, you saw a lot of parts of the grass coming up when players were running, making it difficult for them to keep their balance when they're on a stride going forward, when they're on a juke move to go sideways. Those type of movement where your hips are not right above your stance, you lose your balance, and we've seen that happen many times, especially to Breck Shea. Why? Because he's big and he's tall, and it's a little harder for them to keep their balance once they have it that kind of stride on the power on the grass. Second of all, he's on a position in the box with the ball falling at his feet, and he's off balance and trying to make something out of it. And he knows he needs to score or get a clear opportunity because they're not going to get a lot in that game. So he's already slipping and he's stepping like he misstepped and he's like falling basically. So he decided to make something out of it. It's like, okay, there's a defender coming next to me. I'll just So it's basically like a fraction of a second. Like, I have to make something out of this.
Yeah, he as they say, to be diplomatic, he went to ground easy. And by easy, I meant with no
untouched.
one within 10 feet of.
Well, he was going to ground anyways, so he just embellished it a little.
Yeah, the reverse angle that you saw on the broadcast is hilarious because you can see the referee in the shot. It's the exact same view that the referee would have had. So, as a ref, you'd be like, "Yo, yeah, that's
you're getting a yellow. Yeah, you got a yellow because I see grass between the 2 foot and legs, which means there's no contact, and yeah, you're getting a yellow."
I saw someone on Twitter last night. It was an agent actually that wrote
Ron Waxman. Yes. Yeah,
the only way that you can get rid of diving in soccer is to make it a red, and I thought that was an interesting, pretty extreme position.
It goes back to what we were talking about last week, right? We're saying if you consistently give yellow for diving every time you see one, after a few games where 3 players get sent off because they got accumulated too many yellows and stuff like that, it's going to change. Ron Waxman, which is a New York sports agent in the world of soccer based in New York, by the way, and if you want to have great periscope of the New York city skyline, just follow Ron. But Ron was saying on Twitter last night, if you get a red card every time, which means teams are going to forfeit games because, well, Suarez dives 3 times in a game. Done. Dude, you're getting red. All right, you got 8 players. We're going to have to forfeit this game. This could happen, but after a few weeks, I have to say, players will be mindful of it.
Yeah. So someone in the check that knows the laws better than I can check it. I think you can play with 7, but because I have memories.
It only happens in FIFA, like in FIFA 94, where I used to get sent off all the time because I used to slide into the keeper easily after the whistle, and then you get sent off. Yeah, you remember that. So I remember losing games by default. I think you were probably right, 7, I think.
Yeah, the reason I remember this is because I remember playing games when I on my teams back when I was on playing adult when I was in my early 20s, and occasionally the guys would get a little too rowdy the night before, and we'd have 6 guys show up and we'd have to forfeit. Yeah, that has happened there. That's not quite professional level though. No, look, it's extreme as you said, and I don't know if they'd ever get there. To me, I do think that the after the fact red card though might get some attention too. That if you determine some player was diving after the fact by a video replay, and you were to give them a 1-game suspension for doing that in turn maybe give them a fine that was equivalent to a game salary, that certainly might get their attention then. But I'm also not someone, Kevin, that gets as worked up about diving as others. Obviously,
we're a bit desensitized, I think, though. Watching the game for so long and seeing it happen for so long, it's like we got accustomed to it. But people, they do have a point. Like what we're talking about last night with Jeff, the new soccer fans who quickly find something to hate about soccer. That's a small aspect, but it's a loud aspect of the fan base. They always talk bad about the diving. They kind of have a point, though. We let it go so far that now it's actually a big problem in the game itself.
Yeah, look, I follow other sports where, I'm a hockey fan. I'm not as big as I used to be, but there's diving in hockey. Don't let the hockey fans tell you otherwise. I played the game at a relatively okay level and was taught how to dive by my coach. So that happens in the game. You tuck the stick below your arm. You try and pull the stick into you so it looks like you're being hooked. There's lots of things that you can do to try and manipulate the referee into a penalty. But the one big difference between a hockey dive and a soccer dive when it's bad is that that sort of over the top dramatics of it. Like, look at Vardy's reaction to having been nudged in the head, right?
Yeah, well, if you see the side view, there is contact, but there's as much contact as if I would rub your shoulder to tell you good job.
Yeah, and he flies back like he's been shot. And unfortunately, and I think that the other part of this is that there's good evidence that it works. So that's why they do it, and that's sort of why it's frustrating for many of us, including myself, when it gets to that over the top reaction to it. If they were just sort of doing things to, like, maybe like you feel some contact and you go down when you might not have had to go down, I don't actually have as much of an issue with that because it's almost a smart play. But when you go down and you fly your hands in the air and you roll around like you've been shot,
and you stay on the ground for about 2 minutes, and then you're back and you're fine and you can run. Like, I get it. You got a cramp, it's gonna hurt for 2 minutes, and you'll be fine after. I get it. If you get a knock, it's the same. But when you're diving, you're trying to replicate that. Yeah, it has become a huge problem in majority of the facet of the game, not just for the dive, and that leads us to Tweetgate as well, because it started with the dive by Portland, the player dive, and then Galaxy, even though they lost that game, they had a little fun on Twitter. They made a video basically, but it's the same video everybody makes, with the cells multiplying and many things happening, and you have the player diving all across that. You have the Ant-Man sequence when you zoom into the molecules and the atoms and all that, and you have like Nagby swimming and diving in there, and then it started like a Twitter feud between the two. It's kind of interesting how social media now has created kind of like a rivalry between two clubs.
Yeah. Kevin just described the meme that the Galaxy social media department put out there. Portland's response was salty as all hell. And if you read Merritt Paulson's reaction to it, he sort of suggested that he wasn't as happy with the response by the social media staff, who just really didn't have very thick of a skin about it. It was a little bit of fun that the Galaxy are having. There's a tradition within LA, even if you look back to the LA Kings, we're kind of the first team to sort of start doing funny memes and sort of having like little friendly banter with other teams that they were playing. It's fun, and fans react to it and they like it and they enjoy it because it seems like their fans like them, and you want to believe that the teams are in it with you, you know what I mean? And like fans will have that kind of banter. So it's kind of fun to see the official team accounts do. Unfortunately, based on Portland's reaction to it, and more importantly, based on words that Grant Wall is reporting, that the league is quote unquote investigating and are going to speak to the Galaxy about this meme. I suspect that their concern with it is the fact that it implies diving, which in turn would be insulting pro or challenging pro's decision. So as a team,
and highlighting the aspect we just talked about, an aspect that nobody likes about the game,
which is, I remember back a few years ago when, again, to go back to TFC's Champions League experience, when they were playing out of Unite, and they dove all over the park that day, and it was TFC put a video out with the Benny Hill theme song playing throughout it, which just showed all of these players rolling around in the pitch and dramatically diving and getting calls for 30 to 50 times in a game, right? So they had this like 3-minute video, and it was beloved in TFC circles. And I'm sure TFC fans that have been around that long are remembering it and chuckling, thinking back on it. No one had any issue with that, but that wasn't MLS referees. That wasn't an MLS team. That wasn't highlighting bad play by MLS players. It was highlighting, look how bad they are outside this league. So that's a bit of a difference there. But at the same time, MLS, give your head a shake. Is it really that bad that this is happening? It's drawing people's attention. I saw someone tweet out, the MLS should be thanking me because I never would have watched the highlights of LA Portland until I saw this meme, and then I went back and looked for them. So, it can draw as much positive attention.
Well, yeah, but why would you even say that? Like, there's an agenda. There's an intention even behind that comment. What are you trying to do? What are you trying to say, that MLS is not that great? Have you watched the season? No. How can you pass a judgment? Come on. That drives me crazy though. Like, when you have just an example, last night, a lot of people I've asked on Twitter for Vancouver and Champions League, see how important, because I always feel that way, because it's important for when we're the supporters, but when you look at the clubs and the leagues and the sponsors and the way that the game was not even shown until last minute decision. You don't see that importance, but in the fan base, you do. Where's reality? Where's the truth? And then you have people saying, "Oh, the league sucks." It's not even. It's like 10. It's club is high. It's totally is different. There's a lot of different ways to look at it. So no, you're right. When you can't really argue, anyways. You just have to say yes, yes.
Yeah. Well, no, it can be a bit confusing. The MLS, as I've said before, this is going a little off topic from this, but it is both simultaneously the most overrated and underrated league in the world, in my opinion. Those that detract from it, detract from it in a way that's just absurd sometimes in terms of the criticism they put forward there. And there are those out there too that, and this is where some of the detraction comes from, that emphasize where it might stand. I've heard official sources suggest that, MLS teams could compete in the Premier League. They couldn't. I'm sorry. They couldn't. It would be like watching what we just watched last night, game after game. They might get 10 points. But it's hard to explain, though, because the reason they can't is because of the structure that they play under. If you change the structure that they played under and instead allowed them to spend what they needed to spend to try and compete, it allowed them to, not have the same restrictions in terms of quotas and things like that, then they may be able to compete.
Funny you say that. Andrea Pirlo said the exact same thing in the last few hours, midfielder for the NYCFC, of course, and legend from the Italian national team and Juventus. So Pirlo was saying, well, and let's not forget AC Milan too, but Pirlo, Duane, mentioned that the salary cap aspect of Major League Soccer is what is taking away chances, maybe impeding Major League Soccer roster and the potential to have even better teams.
Yeah. This isn't where the topic was going, but we might as well finish it now. Yes. Look, there is a tradition in North American sports, and Jen and I talk about this all the time on our rugby podcast, which you'll see another one out soon, that is different from what we see in Europe, where it is more about a free market over there. And here it is more about trying to bring the lowest up to closer to the top so that you have an equally competitive sort of market. And salary caps are a big part of that. There's other part of salary caps is controlling revenues for the owners, but that's an aside for now. If you allowed MLSE to spend as much money as they wanted, they would probably double what they're spending on TFC right now and still make money on them. And that would make that team just that much better, right? And the LA Galaxy are the same way, and the Seattle Sounders are the same way. And I'm sure NYCFC would be even bigger than all of them combined. So you can imagine what kind of teams in those markets, especially NYCFC, let's just use them for an example right now. Market, the amount of money that they have to spend, they could probably spend $70-80 million easily on that team, and they could produce a club that I believe that could compete, that could absolutely win the CONCACAF Champions League, that would be competitive against European teams in competitive competitions because they would simply have the money to spend it. And the reality is that they don't. They don't because of the structures that they're placed upon them. And those structures aren't going to change anytime soon because that would also mean that the Columbus Crew wouldn't have a damn chance against them. And that's not in the North American mindset to allow that to happen.
No, absolutely. That's absolutely correct. But to bring it back to that level, example, when will we see a Major League Soccer team win the CONCACAF Champions League? I think this year we'll wait to see the Dallas game today to see how that unfolds, Dallas versus Pachuca. I don't know. And you're right, there's a big difference. And yeah, the DPs can play in Mexico, no problem. But you're talking about Mexican teams that usually starting 11 and some depth on the bench equals every DP player the Major League Soccer team has. So the depth issue, there's a big difference of depth. So until there's 11 DPs, if you want to put it that way, Major League Soccer will have difficulties winning the CONCACAF Champions League.
Final thought, and then we'll take a break. I don't believe that Major League Soccer will win the CCL unless they get significant breaks in the draw. Look, Montreal got the Costa Rican team in the semifinals. That was the break that allowed them to get to the final. And then they played very well for the majority of that final. And then it kind of fell apart in the end there as playing a great team. So there's no shame in that. It's very difficult. You would need basically the Mexican teams to have a down cycle you would need to get a break in the draw so that you were playing Costa Rican teams or Honduran teams or what have you leading up until you get to the important games.
Like
and then
Montreal, let's face it, they beat back then. When you begged the seed, you got their seed. They beat Pachuca, which was an upset, got them an easier game against Alajuelense, which in lead led us to the final against Club America. But the difference in that final, that step between the two clubs was immense. And you're talking about, like you mentioned, a 30 million step. So it's a lot of dollars.
Yeah, imagine in the new round, you're going to need to win 4 rounds in the new format. So let's say whoever gets through Canada this time, and I'm still a little bitter about the fact that they took the spot away from TFC, which doesn't seem fair to me, but we'll leave that for now. Whoever gets it, let's say they draw a Honduran club first, so Olympia, and then they draw Sporting Kansas City second, and then they get Saprissa third, and then finally they draw a Mexican team. There's the potential of that happening, and if that happens, and then the Mexican team, you play a very good tie. Like you can beat a Mexican team once. You can beat one Mexican team once, I think an MLS team can right now if they play perfectly. But to beat several in a run doesn't seem realistic to me, especially when you're trying to balance a regular season. As look, to finish it this way again, Vancouver, and we'll talk about this on Friday, it's going to be challenging for them on Saturday because it's hard to return from Mexico after playing a game like that and be at your best against whoever you're playing, let alone a rival. All right, Kevin, let's take a quick break. We'll come back. We'll just sort of set up our Steven Sandor interview at 10:40 and talk about D2 Wednesdays and maybe a little bit about the Champions League today.
You are listening to SPN Radio, powered by the Sports Podcasting Network. Visit sportspodcastingnetwork.com for more.
Really not hitting our marks today.
Well, we're not hitting them on time, but we're hitting them on content.
There you go. Good thing we're not on us.
That's the beauty of producing our own show, right? We can push breaks, even cancel one or make bigger ones if we need to. But speaking of breaks, Dallas, Duane, made 7 changes in their starting lineup last week, getting ready for today's tie against Pachuca.
Yeah, I think Dallas, the consensus is, and this is with all due respect to Vancouver, and I think even Whitecaps fans that are rational about this will understand why we don't even need to say in all due respect. I think most people look at Dallas as the defending Supporters Shield champions, the consensus being the most talented top to bottom team in Major League Soccer, as having the best chance in a while to truly compete and to win this competition. I still think they're going to be underdogs. I still think it's a long shot to see them beat back-to-back Mexican teams, as I just said, to finish that last block. But I do believe that that tonight is going to be a very intriguing sort of match to watch, and I certainly am looking forward to getting back and finding it on Facebook. And I think it's at Univision tonight, actually. So we'll have to see how that works up here, but we'll hopefully be able to find. I'm sure there's a way we can. We'll find it and we'll watch that game. So I am looking very forward to it. I tell you what, if Dallas can't compete against Pachuca, that is going to be quite damning towards MLS's chances. And I am, in fairness to MLS conventional media, I am hearing more and more of them sort of admit this gap, because there were years where they kind of played it up as if it was an equal footing challenge, but I don't really hear that anymore, Kevin.
No, exactly. There is a gap. Like, maybe the teams are closer to Monterrey and Santos Laguna than before, but Club America, Tigres, the big teams from Liga MX that are dominant right now, and Tigres are the defending Liga MX champions. So you do have a very high-skilled team. And Pachuca is maybe not a top tier like Club America and Tigres, but they're an excellent Mexican team as well. That we'll see. They have bad experience against MLS teams now when they're running against the Montreal Impact, and they didn't like the playing condition in Montreal, and that late goal by Cameron Porter, of course, we all remember. Can Dallas muster that history and be able to pull off an upset? Because yes, it would be an upset, Dallas beating Pachuca, and move on to the final. That would be very fascinating.
Yeah, the one difference, final thought, The one difference I see between how MLS teams are playing this competition now versus when they did going back 5-6 years ago is that they do tend to take it seriously now. Whereas back then, even in a knockout stage, you would often see like scrubs playing in this competition. You still sometimes do. I remember Colorado being in it a couple years ago and them not even taking it at all seriously. So you do see some MLS teams completely focusing on the regular season, but it's become a little more even now, which has sort of narrowed the gap a little bit, at least visually. I think the gap's the same, but it's just, you're not, if you put your kids out there, your gap's huge. If you put your starters out there,
you're not going to get blowout. Yeah, we haven't seen a blowout in recent years, at least.
Yeah, like, I mean, maybe that TFC Santos game a few years ago when
that's a few years ago, yeah.
When Herc went at them. 3. Well, the Whitecaps have been in the last 2, and the Impact were in the one before that. So TFC was the last in 4 years ago. So that when Herc Gomez scored at the end, and if anyone didn't see it, Herc's little tweet back at me yesterday was kind of funny. I said that I was responding to Charles Bowman saying that usually when MLS teams collapse, it's in the last 10 minutes, so watch out. And then Herc just tweeted at me, "Don't worry, Duane, I've retired." And TFC fans.
Yeah, what about Quintero? That quick killer with Laguna and with America. So,
yeah,
you never know.
Oh, there's been some collapses. Well, even that final in Montreal, which remains one of the things I will remember to the day. Be a flashpoint memory when on my deathbed, being around there for that noise when Montreal scored the first goal. But
the silence when America started scoring.
Yeah, once they got rolling that day, it was like, oh yeah, this is not pretty right now. And you could just tell it was like, once the lead was gone, there was like sort of a moment in that game where Montreal just went, yeah, there's no way back. And their bodies relaxed and it was done at that point. And that's the danger. I was a little afraid for Vancouver last night when they allowed that second goal that they might find a third or even fourth in the last 5 minutes or so. But fortunately for them, they were able to.
Fortunately, they subbed off De Jong before he got sent off, but yeah, that's enough, Champions League.
Yeah, well, I didn't think he had the best of games. But all right, quickly before we take a break to get Steven Sandor on the line, our shows on Wednesday this year are going to be focused on Division II, at least for our interview. So that will either be the USL or NASL because they're both now at the same level. So we will endeavor to have an interview each Wednesday, which is focused on those leagues, on the development side of things, on the side just below. I will have Steven Sandor on now. Of course, he is the color commentator for FC Edmonton, so he will be previewing the Eddies a little bit, talking a little bit about the NASL in general. Steven watched the game last night with the Whitecaps, so since that seems to be the theme of today's show, we might ask him a little bit about that as well. But we will try and keep it focused more, at least at the beginning of the interview, on the upcoming NASL and FC Edmonton's season, who, based on my understanding, the Eddies might be amongst the favorites to win that league this year with some of the changes that have happened. So we'll ask him about that. I'll endeavor to get an Ottawa guest on next week because we are Canadian and we'll focus on the Canadian teams a bit. But by and large, this will be D2 Wednesdays moving forward, Kevin.
Absolutely. We'll take a quick break and come back with Steven Sandor. You're listening to Soccer Today on SPN Radio. You can find the on-demand version of this very show on iTunes, Stitcher, Feedburner, Podbay Player, Podbean, anywhere you get your podcasts under the Sports Podcasting Network feed. Subscribe to our YouTube page to make sure you never miss a live show talking about soccer today, the MLS post-game show, Open Lines After Dark, 5 Rings Daily during the Olympics. Make sure you subscribe and give us a follow on Twitter at SportsPodNet and like our Facebook page, facebook.com/Sports Podcasting Network. Joining us from the 11.ca and Plastic Pitch, Steven Sandor. Steven, how are you today?
Doing fine, thanks.
Steven, obviously this is D2 Wednesdays, we're calling it now, which is which is our title for the year. We're going to focus on the level just below Major League Soccer. You, of course, have a great affiliation with the Eddies out there for years now. I am pretty excited by the Eddies this year and their potential in the NASL. Do you share that excitement?
Yeah, I think the first thing is that throughout this whole Div 2 NASL crisis of the last winter, there was no doubt that FC Edmonton emerged as the most stable franchise in the league. The one that was steadfast in saying that everything's going to be okay, we're going to be playing next year. The one that worked the hardest to retain its players. The one that came out with the most intact roster. Yes, they lost a couple of key pieces, but in terms of the actual base of guys, going forward, no team in NASL had the same kind of continuity the Eddies had. And they brought in a few interesting pieces in the spring, and they're set. Like, their roster is done. I don't think any other NASL team is close to having a roster set. They're off in England right now playing their preseason schedule. They've already played Wigan's under 23s, and they played Burnley's under 23s yesterday. And going to Scotland last year for preseason really helped them in terms of getting off to a better start to the season than they've had in the past. I think they're hopeful that it's going to be the same this year. So a very sort of stable system. And I think the Eddies go in with a very unusual, I think, tag that they haven't had in the past of being, favorites rather than underdogs going into this NASL season.
Yeah, fair enough. Could you highlight a few of the changes that they have brought in? You said there's some interesting pieces there.
Well, I think obviously on the Canadian side, bringing in Adam Straith, he's on a spring season contract like Marcel Diong was with Ottawa last year. But the hope is that they can keep Adam Straith long term. He has a long relationship with Colin Miller. Of course, he's very close with some of the other guys in the national team that play with the Eddies. And he's going to be brought in to bring some stability to the back line, some experience, and as well as a guy that can move into the midfield if need be. Chris Konopka, the former TFC goalie, will be in net for the Eddies. So that's it's an interesting piece. And Dean Shields, a guy who scored a lot wherever he's been in Scotland, former Arsenal youth product, has been brought in to replace Daryl Fordyce, who went to FC Cincinnati in the forward position. So another Northern Irish player that is expected to make a big impact with the Eddies and with the club. And so those there's some moving pieces. Sabri Katab, Norwegian/Egyptian player, brought into the midfield, and Nathan Sincera, who replaces Adam Eckersley at left back. And Nathan Sincera was Adam Straith's teammate at Fredrikstad, the Norwegian league last year, and Nathan Sincera was actually the captain of that team. He's a former England youth international. Has stated his desire to play for India, but India does not allow players with dual passports to play for their national team.
Now, when you're looking at the off-season off the pitch, it was a difficult and complicated one if you're a supporter of the NASL and the USL and all the tractations that happen in this off-season. What's the feeling on the supporters level coming up to the season? Because when it was happening, people were wondering where it was going, and people were actually very disappointed with the way Edmonton handled it at that moment. With hindsight, we actually seen that it was probably the best possible scenario the way it happened for Edmonton. But during it happening, the feeling was different. How are the supporters feeling about this season?
I'm going to be harsh when I say this, but during that whole process, Edmonton got criticized for being, for all intents and purposes, just saying that we're staying the course and business as usual, and we're selling tickets and actually, selling more tickets than we've ever had in the past. And they got criticized for it as somehow being like weird or crazy. And I have to say, during that whole process in November and December, there were a lot of stories that were planted in the media. A lot of people had some definite agendas and planted stories that were definitely not true. I'm not here to start screaming fake news because that's the last thing I want to do. But there's a lot of bloggers out there who are looking to get some attention, and we're taking unverified stories and running with them. And in the end, those stories weren't close to being necessarily true. I think in the long run, the decision that was come to with USL and NASL, they both go to Division 2, was the best one. I think the last thing you want to do in North America, whether it's United States or Canada, is to kill teams and markets or to have leagues in this adversarial relationship. The best thing that's come out of NASL is we have a new commissioner. The league has a new commissioner. and Rishi Segal, who's much more of a conciliator. I think before NASL under Bill Peterson, as we know, was very antagonistic, wanting to take on the world, us versus USL, us versus MLS, us versus the USSF, us versus, look, they had a long list of verses, right? I mean, they were the Rebel League. And I think NASL no longer wants to be seen as the Rebel League. They want to be seen as a partner. And I think we've already seen that shift quite a bit in terms of the way the league is dialoguing with other teams. I think in the long run, that's going to help the league. I still get the feeling that from players that they would rather play in NASL than USL simply because the money's a little bit better. There's not that affiliate team stuff that goes with USL. I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but I also think that's something that USL's got to wrestle with as it grows, because it does create a little bit of a stigma, and it's something that they're going to have to address if they want to grow and keep that Division II status, because obviously it hurts them with some of the teams. I think there's a great sense of optimism now in NASL. I think, in a much smaller level, but there is a comparison made to MLS, when MLS had to cull the Florida teams and shrink before it could grow. I think NASL's in a point where it had grown too fast. There were teams that weren't ready to be playing in this league. There were some expansion markets that should never have been granted, some expansion owners who should never have been given teams. And now I think that process is going to be a lot more careful going forward. I think the league is going to be much more diligent in doing its homework. And I think now going forward, the 8 members that are there are now going to look forward to building a more solid foundation, a more solid league, and one that fits in to the pyramid a little bit better. And I think all of those things together, plus the people on board now behind the scenes, people like Peter Wilt, who's working very, very hard to help grow NASL. These things are going to help the league in the long run. Will it work in the long run? Who knows? Division II soccer, every day is a crisis. I mean, I've been around it long enough to know that you wake up every morning and every day is a crisis if you're in lower division soccer in North America. It was maybe a little bit worse in November and December, but it was never really as bad as it was made out to be. There were still a lot of owners dedicated on the NASL side to getting this deal done, to figuring out what they were going to do going forward. And there were a lot more owners committed to NASL than, the people out there gave it credit for. I think a lot of people thought everyone was bailing the ship, when in fact there was a solid group of owners that you're seeing that were looking to A, save the New York Cosmos, and B, save the league, because those two things go hand in hand. And so I think what you have now is a group of very committed people going forward who are now looking at building a league that no longer wants to take on the world, but simply wants to build fans and build fan bases in some markets and do some good things. And I mean, they have some huge challenges going forward, but so does USL, and frankly, so does MLS, but not at the same level, obviously. But to build this game in across the continent.
Now, the FC Edmonton are starting the 2017 season with their biggest off-season ticket sales ever in history, the biggest expectation on the pitch as well. Is this the year? Is this the breakthrough year that we have been waiting for FC Edmonton to finally break through that glass ceiling of not just winning, but winning and drawing more fans at Clark Stadium?
I wish I could say yes. I think there's a lot of positive indicators. I think in some ways the way our market is in Edmonton and the sports market and the sports media world, the fact that the Oilers are having such a great year was a good thing during November and December, because absolutely no one was paying any attention to the NASL so-called crisis in Edmonton, and that's why they kept selling tickets for the soccer club, because no one actually knew the league had any sort of issues. Right now sports desks are all tapped out. Everybody's at the Oilers game. I mean, it's Connor McDavid all the time. That's going to be what was a good thing for FC Edmonton is going to turn into a very bad thing for FC Edmonton in April and May. We're going into the start of the season, and you're going to be playing in April. And I mean, with the Oilers being in the playoffs, you're going to see, and I'm sure anyone can appreciate if the Leafs are in the playoffs or the Habs are in the playoffs. But Edmonton's even much more of a hockey takes up that much more percentage of our psyche market than those markets. If the Oilers end up playing the Flames in the first round, like, look out. Like, there's going to be absolutely no media attention to be paid anywhere else in the whole province to anything. And I'm not just talking soccer. So the fact is that the Eddies' early part of the schedule is going to have to bump up against the Oilers' first playoff run in a decade. And that is going to be a challenge for them. It's a challenge in any market, and it's going to be a huge challenge for the Eddies going forward. I do think that the schedule, getting some games off of Sunday afternoons to split it now to have some Friday and Saturday night games, is going to help. It helps at the gate. It doesn't help with TV because actually those are less desirable time slots for television because no one wants to give up a prime time slot. Like, I mean, it'd be hard to convince someone to give up a prime time slot. I shouldn't say nobody for the Eddies. Whereas on Sunday afternoons, it's a really nice fit. So, but at the gate, that should help. At least that's the thinking, that's going to help going forward. Some people don't like the Sundays at 2s, but we'll see going forward. And, the last thing that needs to improve for the Eddies, and I think, Duane, I think you'll remember this in the early ways of Toronto FC. The Eddies are under the same curse where it seems that you can almost set your calendar that the weather is going to be beautiful up until about 2 hours before kickoff. And then it's going to turn into some horrible thunderstorm, rainstorm, windstorm, snowstorm. And then about half an hour after the game, it's going to clear up. And the Eddies have had this huge, horrible luck with weather over the last 2 years. It's become a running joke amongst the fans. And I think, Duane, there was 1 year with Toronto FC. I can't remember if that was year 2 or year 3, where it seemed like every time TFC had a home game, it was a downpour. And it was nice, like an hour before the game. But then you go to BMO Field and be like, wow, the weather's rolled in and it's an absolute downpour. And it's nice afterwards. And the Eddies seem to have that same curse. It's become like a running joke at the club and with the players and such and with the coaches that, oh boy, it's Sunday, our game time's rolling around and look, the clouds are rolling in. Or, oh, the snow started to fall. So, I'm almost sort of jealous of Minnesota United's opening game because of they got a snowstorm that I only dreamed that we could have had. But, the fact is our weather hasn't been good as well. So a lot of factors, but that's the way. That's the reality of a Canadian sports market. And you got to compete. You got to be able to stick out, and winning is going to help. That's why the Eddies need to get off to a good start.
Yeah, the year you're talking about, I actually tracked it out. There had only been something like 10 rain days in the entire summer, and TFC game days had fallen on 7 of them or something silly like that.
It's kind of ridiculous. It was kind of ridiculous, and I remember that was a running joke in the press box too about the weather, and it just seems that Edmonton's in that same curse right now.
All right. Let's look ahead to the Voyageurs Cup a little bit in the matchup with Ottawa. Now, you did mention that you're trying to be more conciliatory. They're trying to be cooperative and not always have battles, though no more verses with the NASL. But is there going to be a little bit extra spice in that one because Ottawa took the decision to go USL, so it now is a USL, NASL fight? I'm sure at some level at the league office, they'd still like to maybe prove that they're a little bit better than USL, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I think there's other reasons too. I think we have to remember the reasons for Ottawa's departure and Tampa Bay's departure were totally different. And, Tampa Bay, they both had definite political strain to them. But let's face it, Ottawa has been preparing this move for 2 years. The Ottawa has, clearly been on a budget track for about a year and a half. And they chopped the roster before the start of last season. In NASL and went cost cutting on the roster. So the reasoning's a little bit different. Tampa Bay was far more political battles between the owners and the whole NASL, USL, politics that goes on between the leagues. And of course, Tampa Bay feeling that USL is a better place for them to be to launch an MLS bid. The Ottawa Fury have, with their affiliation deal with the Montreal Impact, which seems to actually generate very few Montreal Impact players going over to Ottawa. There was a lot of budgetary concerns with that in terms of chopping down the travel schedule, getting to a more manageable roster budget and such. So those things are different. So I do think there's going to be a lot of spice between it. There's a lot of history between the clubs. Eddie Edward, former Eddie, longtime Eddie, is going to be on the Ottawa side. Mauro Eustachio, former longtime Ottawa Fury, is going to be on the Edmonton side. Another player that was added, and a player who was supposed to join FC Edmonton last year in a deal that got aborted at the last second. He was actually supposed to join the Eddies for the fall season last year because, honestly, he didn't really fit under Paul Dalglish's plans in Ottawa before Mark Dos Santos used him a lot. So, there's a lot of history between the clubs, and yes, it will definitely, and the Eddies have definitely circled those dates, and I know that Ottawa has as well. A lot to prove between the clubs, and obviously Ottawa beat the Eddies for the first time last year when those two played the preliminary round, and the Eddies are going to want to settle that score. I think the Eddies will come in as heavy favorites again, simply because they haven't had the roster turnover. You look at the players they've got, and they've got I guess what we call home field advantage because they finished higher in NASL last year than Ottawa because they have the second leg at home. But we're looking forward to that. But the Eddies do have a heavy schedule at that time, so it's that same thing where they're going to have to rotate a bit around that time. But it will be very, very interesting opening series. And, the Eddies really badly want that date with TFC because they think that it's going to generate a lot of interest. TFC, honestly, this is Edmonton, so obviously the biggest sell would be not even so much Javinko, but the fact that to St. Ricketts coming home to play FC Edmonton would be a huge sell, at least in the soccer community in the city.
He'd probably start a game like that too, likely anyway. So that'd be interesting to see for sure. Stephen, we have 2 minutes left here. In the 2 minutes, can you just quickly give us a few your indication of who you think might be the other teams to watch in NASL this year?
Well, always the Cosmos. It seems that they didn't skip a beat in spending money and adding players in Miami simply because of their budgets. They're still operating. I mean, we're talking about clubs that are supposed to be more conservative in terms of the NASL trying to be a little bit more cost efficient. But these are still clubs that are looking to attract players and looking to bring guys in. Indy is still going to be strong as well. I mean, it's going to be a really interesting group because with only 8 teams. There's a lot of teams that are going to, I think those 4 teams are going to be very strong. And, San Francisco is building something really interesting out there under Mark Dos Santos. And one thing Mark Dos Santos has proven is he can turn something around really quickly, which he did in Ottawa. And I don't think San Francisco are going to be the so-called expansion team with quotes around it for very long. I think that they've got some interesting pieces coming in. A lot of Canadians on that team with Wimet and Adacora on that team, and the other pieces as well. And this is it's a very, very Canadian. Kyle Becker as well in San Francisco. So it's going to be an interesting group to watch. So it's funny. I think San Francisco might end up being the number 2 team to Edmonton this year in NASL in terms of Canadian content.
All right, Stephen. Quickly before we go, anything you want to promote?
Next issue of Plastic Pitch will come out probably sometime April. We're just putting it together right now. Working away on a couple of features and working towards the new issue. Catching up a little bit with the starts of the new seasons, and obviously, asking the question: can TFC avoid the curse that basically hits every team that the year after losing a championship, you really struggle? Early indications are that it might be a little bit of a struggle for TFC, but that's sort of normal in the sports world, especially in the MLS. Only 2 teams have ever returned to the final after losing the final the year before.
All right, Stephen Sandor, 11.ca, Plastic Pitch. Thanks again, Stephen.
All right.
And until tomorrow on Soccer Today, for Duane Rollins, I am Kevin Laramee. You can follow Duane on Twitter at 24th Minute and myself at Kevin Laramee. You can follow our guest today, Stephen Sandor, at Stephen Sandor. Until tomorrow, have a great soccer. You were listening to SPN, the Sports Podcasting Network. Visit us, sportspodcastingnetwork.com.